right? Okay. So, looking into learning new tricks. Well, of course, it's very easy to just say, okay, I'm going to learn a new trick. But somewhere along the way, if your brain is fixed with something, there is a tendency that you would likely not follow, or you will not likely um, uh, connect or submit to an idea, right? That's why we have conflicts, right? Sometimes you are also right, the other person is also correct, but it's just that the way you look at things, it doesn't always work. All right, so we have two hemispheres in our brain. Some brain research has pointed to the notion that the two hemispheres of the brain having different functions. So we have the left brain, okay, and we have the right brain. What is the left brain? What does it do? All right, I think it's very good for us to think about it. What does the left brain do? What does the right brain do? So if you have two hemispheres in your brain, what what are their functions? All right, so here's the answer. The left brain specializes in academic aspects of learning. Academic, what does it mean? It means language, mathematical processes, logical thoughts, sequences, and analysis. And the right brain, on the other hand, is principally concerned with creative activities like rhyme, rhythm, music, visual impressions, color, and pictures, right? So the right brain is more on creativity, and the left brain is specializing in academic aspects, right? So just because your learner is not very good when it comes to academics, sometimes we have some learners who are really struggling with learning these things, and they would say, no, why do I have to learn about this? Why do I have to know these? So it doesn't necessarily mean that that they may have some issues or problems in their learning. It's just that perhaps their left brain, or their left brain is more dominant, or the right brain is more dominant. So if they are creative, there might be some creative individuals, and there are some that are more academic. All right. Okay, so let's take a look at the hemispheres that we have. One hemisphere is predominantly concerned with the logical, and the other is more creative. So one is logic, the other one is creative. Okay, does that make sense? Learning. Okay, one on the left and one is on the right. So one hemisphere is logic, the other one is creative. Okay, great. So you will notice sometimes that creative individuals may not all the time be logical, or they're more on the dreamy side of it. And that does not make them a lesser person, right? Okay. This functional difference has implications for how we learn. The problem of brain laterality and the difference in what is known as hemispheric dominance can be seen to relate to an individual's learning style. If an individual has a dominant hemisphere, which seems to be the case in most of us, then the approach taken to mental activity, which of course includes learning, will be affected. So, if you have a dominant hemisphere, and the approach to that is, um, not effective, right? Or how do we say that? The the approach, or the way we learn things, and the way we we deliver the learning, if it is not in line with that, sometimes it could be affected. It doesn't necessarily mean that it will never be successful, but sometimes it can be a factor. All right, let's take a look at left brain dominance, if you can find here. Left brain dominance. Those of us who are left brain tend to favor a slow step by step build up of information. Learning proceeds in a linear fashion. Right brain. Those of us who are right brain prefer to see the whole picture, to have an overview. Learning is more global or holistic activity. So, if you have a right brain dominance, so you will likely go and take a look at that, and the creative way, the way you appreciate things. Left brain, you're more on step by step, right? And the right brain, if you have right brain dominance, you're waiting for the clear picture. So, Can you, probably you could ask yourself, are you left brained or right brained? I think it's very important for us to know that so that we can understand ourselves better. And with that, we can also learn better. Learn not only with things that are given to us, but learning for ourselves. All right, so we have the right brain dominance here, right? Again, what's the left? The left is more logical, and the right is more creative. Okay, great. So, there are some researchers who set great store by differentiation of left and right brain hemispheres. Others, while recognizing the importance of the supposed difference and considering it worthy of attention and investigation, are less dogmatic about it. So, there are some aspects that we could see it actually can affect our learner. So we have to understand everybody, all the learners that we have in the class. If we are teaching, we have to understand the way they learn and the way they can actually grasp information. So not everyone, just because somebody is not creative, doesn't necessarily make them a lesser learner or at the lesser end, right? So we just have to understand that sometimes that's how the brain works. All right, so let's take a look at holistic learning. All right. As for more intellectual functions of the two hemispheres, we are told that it's important not to overemphasize the different functions because the almost infinite complexity of the brain works holistically with both hemispheres engaged to lesser and greater degrees in all our mental activities. So when mental activities are happening in our brain, there are so many things that are happening. So if you have a left brain dominance, so you would likely want to take it one, two, three, four. And if you have the right brain dominance, right, so you will likely want to wait for the big picture. Sometimes you would still take a look at how it will turn out later on. So we are sometimes an artist. We are just not that one, two, three. We may not be that academically dominant, or we are sometimes have this, the logic is not very strong, but that could probably because we have the right side of the brain, or the right hemisphere, or the right side of the brain is more dominant than the left. All right. It's important also to recognize that two hemispheres operate and process information in very different ways. Okay. Hannah Ford refers to a gestalt hemisphere and a logic hemisphere. The name gestalt comes from the group of psychologists who describe the working of the human mind in a way that suggests that it is capable of working with very large whole events and capable of filling in missing elements or of large information sets. The gestalt hemisphere, which in most, not all people, is the right hemisphere, deals with the whole picture. It operates intuitively and in a more random manner than the logic hemisphere. The logic hemisphere, which is usually the left hemisphere, processes information piece by piece. Okay, great. Did you get that one? The logic hemisphere, which is usually the left hemisphere, processes information piece by piece. That's why you would notice when people try to put all information together piece by piece, they try to just focus on that and that alone. But on the other hand, looking at the gestalt hemisphere, it deals with the whole picture. So sometimes you would just wonder, like, how? What is he doing if you don't understand? Somebody might be trying to put all the blocks together and nobody understand what he's doing. And that's gestalt hemisphere, right? Gestalt hemisphere, which in most but not all people is the right hemisphere and deals with the whole picture, operates intuitively and in a more random manner than the logic hemisphere. The logic hemisphere, which is usually the left hemisphere, processes information piece by piece, right? That's logic, and the other side is in sequence. Right. The left one is piece by piece in sequence and fine detail, while the gestalt hemisphere is more on the bigger picture. So sometimes it's random than the logic hemisphere. So when we say random, random, that means that sometimes nobody can understand them, while they are trying to put all these understandings or all these ideas together. So while they put the ideas together, people start to just think about it. Like uh, um, nobody could understand what you're actually working on and what you're doing, and people are just trying to create a story out of it, and that's the logical part. And the other one is the gestalt, right? The gestalt is your creative side. So learners can sometimes, the brain of learners can sometimes work differently, and we have to understand that all of us, we have two hemispheres. We have that part of it, but sometimes we have left that is dominant, and we have right that is dominant, and that's why you would notice that there are some conflicts that happens to people, right? And that conflict actually is based, is not actually that both are wrong, because the other one would look at things one, two, three, four, five details. Let's say more on the left hemisphere, right? Or the left brain. So they will try to work out something that will get them to a conclusion. On the other hand, there could be groups of people that will be more on looking at the whole picture. So they are usually more on trying to put all the details, all right, like yeah, what could this be? And you look at the bigger picture at the end. All right, so yeah, it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing, the way our brains are working, and it's important that we have a clear understanding of how that works. Otherwise, we could not be able to understand our learners, and sometimes it's just so quick for us to just say, "Oh, you're not learning. Oh, you're not listening. Oh, you're not focusing." Or maybe, "How come you don't know this? You're already how old? You're already 12. You're already 15 or 20. Sometimes you even say you're already 50 or 40. Why you can't understand this?" So sometimes we have to understand that each learner, or the learners around us, including ourselves, we might be left brained or right brain dominant. Okay, so that's a good thing to really think about, and it's very important in our learning. So if we have a clear understanding of that, I think that will really help us to become better educators, and at the same time better learners for ourselves. All right, the right hemisphere is deemed to work in an emotionally biased way. Okay, if you're right hemisphere, the right hemisphere of our brain, deemed to work in an emotionally biased way, and the left more on intellectual. Okay, so we have the right and left. To elaborate, the right hemisphere is described as the intellectual side, and the left as emotional one. That's why I think we have intelligence quotient, and we have emotional quotient, EQ, right? But I think now we also have SQ, or social quotient, is it? Social intelligence quotient. We have emotional intelligence quotient, and we have the intelligence quotient, academic intelligence quotient. All right, it's a wonderful thing. I was just trying to look at this and try to read through the details of this, and it's amazing. Parts of each hemisphere are mirrored in the other, and some informations are or some functions are shared. So sometimes, in the case of language, for example, there are matched areas in both sides of the brain, but their functions are slightly different. This has been described as complementary hemispheric specialization, and makes a rigid differentiation, which is sometimes put forward as less than convincing. There are certain areas of the brain, however, that have specialist functions. And for example, language and damage to the area can lead to a loss of certain aspects of language, but other aspects may well be unaffected. Having said all of this, we should be asking what impact this knowledge and can have, or how can this actually affect our learning activities in the classroom. And the answer might well be very little. The precise location of intellectual or emotional centers of the brain do not affect what teachers plan to do. However, an understanding that these different systems are present is very important. All right, so I think that's the essential part of this, that we have to understand that the structure of the brain works, or the brain, the sides of the brain and the aspects of the brain. We have to understand how this can actually affect our learning, and what could be the impact of these knowledge once we've understood that. All right. So the precise location of intellectual or emotional center of the brains do not affect what teachers plan and do. However, an understanding that these systems are present is very important. We will see in the next section that, okay, emotions and appealing to emotion in learning situations can have a big influence on learning and honest longevity. So, if we could have an understanding of how people learn, how their brains are wired, if we can understand how the left brain and the right brain, and that people have dominance, they can be dominant, left brain dominant, or they can also be right brain dominant. If we can have that understanding, we could also, help if we are teaching or we are helping them to grasp an information. It's very important that we have a clear um, knowledge of that, so that we could understand how people are going to take what the information we are is or how we could be able to take how it is presented. Okay, great. So as teachers, we have to think about how can this information, or how can I help my learner be connected to what I am teaching. So sometimes we might just be more impatient. We might be impatient with them in terms of our presentation, right? When we are presenting information. All right, so here, let's take a look. There are three elements, the three elements of the structure of the brain according to McLean. Okay, this is nice. Okay, the first one, the reptilian or instinctive brain. Reptilian brain controls muscles, balance, and autonomic functions such as breathing and heartbeat, and it's always active even when we are in deep sleep. The reptile. Okay, I think that should be reptilian or reptilian. It should be reptilian or instinctive brain. The second one is the midbrain or emotional brain, also known as the limbic system. The role of this part of the brain is to control emotions, and it's thought to be the location of the long term memory, sometimes referred to as the mammalian brain. Okay. The third one is the neocortex. It's divided into the right and left hemispheres. It's also known as the superior or rational brain, neo-mammalian brain. The neocortex is close in structure to the brains of the primate mammals. The higher cognitive functions which distinguish humans from the animals are in the neocortex. Okay, so let's take a look at this. We have three. Again, three elements of the structure of the brain. The first one is the reptilian or instinctive brain. The second is the midbrain or emotional brain. And the third one is the neocortex. The neocortex, that's where your left hemisphere and the right hemispheres are in. Okay. it's very interesting, right? The reptilian brain, I'll just fast forward a little bit. Okay, so let me just okay. I hope I'm not very fast. Okay, reptilian and instinctive brain, it's more on the control of the muscles, balance, and breathing, heartbeat, all these things, including sleep. And the midbrain or emotional brain is the limbic system. The role of this part is to control emotions. All right, so that's when you feel something, you feel angry, but you're thinking about, like, okay, no, this is not the right time for me to actually respond to that. I think it's a lot better for me to just wait and then let it calm down. All right, and then we have the third one. The third one, we have the neocortex, which is divided into right and left hemispheres, and they are, or that is, or the function of that is for you to, how do we say that? You remember what we have just discussed earlier, the left and the right brain, right? The logical and the creative one. All right. So you have the gestalt and you have the academic logic. Okay. Great. Neocortex will only function if the other parts of the brain will allow it to. For this reason, a calm, composed environment is essential for learning and, in particular, for advanced, abstract, and creative thought. Reptilian brain is simple and, in many cases, functions on a limited number of actions which are set and unchangeable. The more advanced lizards still on have they still only have reptilian brain. That's why if you're going to look at it, you have animals that they will just eat no matter what. They can just attack anyone because that's still part of. Now, if you have just a reptilian brain, then that means you are not yet emotionally strong, right? And probably we could say that some learners could just be no, we can't really say that the learners only may have this aspect because we have to understand that these three come together for a human being. All right, we have to understand three elements of the structure of the brain. That's for humans. So you have reptilian, instinctive brain, midbrain or emotional brain, and your neocortex. And your neocortex, that's the other side of the learning. But learning, the neocortex can only function. It can only function if it's allowed by the how do oh wait a minute right, okay, the part of the brain is involved in problem solving. This is problem solving patterns, right? So that's where we can add discerning relationship and patterns of meaning and problem solving. The neocortex will only function if the other parts of the brain will allow it to. So if the other parts of the brain will not allow it to function, sometimes it could be repressed, right? All right. Neocortex, yep. A calm and composed environment is essential for learning and, in particular, for advanced, abstract, and creative thoughts. So this is the best this is the best illustration for that. If you're hungry and or if you're having some difficulty in breathing, do you really think that you could actually think properly? No, right? You'll be affected. All right. So you have again. What's the three? What are the three? Can you remember the three? The first one is your Is it instinctive? Instinctive, the reptilian or extinctive brain. The second is the midbrain or emotional brain, and the third one is your neocortex. Okay. All right. So if we have clear understanding of this, that will really help us out. More idea that pupils should be in fear of their teacher is worthy of mention here. Okay, the use of sheer terror as a teaching strategy is not to be recommended. All right, so that's why you say, oh, okay, terror teacher. All right, do you actually want to be considered a terror teacher? And if you are a terror teacher, what exactly is the impact of that to your learners? That's really a very good thing to think about. Okay. So it's not recommended to be, this kind of strategy of trying to make you yourself look like you are somebody to be afraid of. Although the prospect of severe punishment has been used in the past, fear is an emotion which may well engender some forms of effective learning. So fear of being caught by a sharp knife example, but as well, we'll see later the negative stress which situations of fear can generate is not good for learning. It is, at a simple level, the low level emotions brought about by positive relationships between teacher and learner that can have the most immediate impact on the learner's success. Okay, so listen to this. If the child likes the teacher, learning can often progress smoothly. This is obviously very difficult to legislate for, but we should be aware that positive and constructive rather than any sort of destructive. So when we are teaching, when you have a good teacher and student relationship, you will actually learn better. All right. So that's something that we could consider as well. So just because you're a terror teacher doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be very effective, right? It's important that we have a clear understanding of that. Otherwise, you might be thinking that um, your strategy or your method or your approach is effective when all the while it is actually destructive. So if you have a clear um, uh, comprehension or understanding of this will definitely help us in our classroom and the challenges and how to create the conditions of the learning environment that will be conducive for the learners. So it's very important. We want our learners to be satisfied with their learning, and we wanted them to have good relationships with their teachers. So if we are the teacher, we should also try to develop that, because it could have an additional or a stronger impact when you have good relationships with a teacher. All right. So looking at this, Kane and Kane, in 1997, they have compiled a list of 12 principles for brain-based learning. And we're going to take a look at this. Okay, if you can see here, number one, the brain is a complex adaptive system. Okay, it's complex, it's adaptive. Okay, adaptive means it can adjust based on what can be seen and what it is exposed into. Number two, the brain is a social brain. Okay, the brain is a social brain, so it can, we will discuss further, but we have to understand, that also needs a kind of connection with other things or other people. Number three, the search for meaning is innate, right? So it's natural that you would want to search for meaning of something. Number four, the search for meaning occurs through patterning. Number five, emotions are critical to patterning. Number six, every brain simultaneously perceives and creates parts and wholes. Learning involves both focused attention and peripheral attention. Learning always involves conscious and unconscious processes. We have at least two ways of organizing memory. Learning is developmental. Complex learning is enhanced by challenge and inhibited by threat. Every brain is uniquely organized. Isn't it amazing for us to actually understand like how brain works? And just because somebody told you before that you are not good enough or you're such a bad student or maybe your grades are way too low, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are less than other people, because you might be good at some things, right? You might be creative if you're not logical. And if you're logical, you may not be creative, but for sure, you have your own way of trying to put things in order. Right, so that's beautiful, right? Okay, so now let's take at number one. Okay, number one, the brain is complex and adaptive. What does it mean? When we say complex and adaptive, you can't just, there are so many things that are happening inside the brain. The brain is continuously monitoring and processing thoughts, emotions, imagination, predispositions, and operating as a psychological level. There is also a neuropsychological system which interacts with and exchanges information with its environment and works in parallel with and in conjunction with other elements that make up the brain. A great brain. Okay, do you have a great brain? A great brain, a great many brain functions are hidden from our consciousness. Some of the things that are happening actually are not, we can't always see their consciousness, like it's hidden from our consciousness. So controlling our breathing, can you actually see it? No, but you know that it works, right? You know that it works. Um, Controlling our breathing, very large number of other essential activities. As the process of learning is complex and multifaceted, learning can and should be approached in a variety of different ways. This idea has certain resonances with what we know about learning styles. So if you're going to go back to learning style, as we have discussed before, if you are a visual learner, or if you have or if you are an auditory learner, so sometimes the way you think may be different compared to others, but you could appreciate more things that you can hear. So you could be a visual learner, you could be an auditory learner, or you could be a kinesthetic learner. Many teachers, in fact, do not need to be told of this. Okay, that means the activity shifting is very important. Activity shifting, teaching to accommodate a range of learning preferences, is also considered to be important. So when we are delivering a message, when we are delivering information to learners, it's important for us to also use different materials. Um, right. Different education materials or tools that can appeal to learners that may be visually, how do we say that, visual, like when they are visual learners, or or they learn more things, or they learn new things more visually, um, and if they are auditory learners or kinesthetic learners. So remember that visual learners are focused on what they can see. Um, Auditory learners focus more on what they can hear, and kinesthetic learners focus on what they do. All right. Description of learning styles by Levine. Okay, that's based on Levine in 2003, as you can see here, right? He recommends transforming a verbal into a visual task and a visual task into a kinesthetic task. So that could be a good way for us to help our learners and try to create a way that could appeal to these three kinds of learning, or three types of learners. All right, the notion of activity shifting is again very important. Let's go to the social brain. A brain is a social brain. What does it mean when your brain is a social brain? So that means brain responds to social engagement. Work with others can be a stimulus to greater enjoyment of learning and to deeper levels of thought about the topic in question. The notion of the social brain, though not couched in identical terms, can be seen and form part of the movement towards collaborative learning and working in groups. So, yeah, you respond to a social engagement, you respond to what you hear, you respond to what other people say, you respond to what is presented to you. It could be positive or negative, but you respond. It may not be visually always, or it may not be auditorily, or it may not always be verbal, but surely there's a response, there's an impact on you when you hear something. All right, so um, yep. So that's connected to the works of Vygotsky and Bruner. Connection to a social constructivist. You are constructing based on what you can hear and what you learn from others as well. So learning, according to them, Vygotsky and Bruner, they say learning is deeply influenced by social interactions and relationships. So you learn through your connections and your interactions with other people. That's the only way for you to learn. I mean, that may have a strong impact. There's a strong influence, right? So sometimes, well, I think if we're gonna say that that's the only way, maybe that's one of the ways that impacts our learning. Maybe that's a better way to say it, because there are some that they like to study more, alone. There are some that they get distracted, but for sure you need to have interactions with other people so that you can continue your your how do we say that, like when you have an interaction with others, there's an influence. You can move forward, or move into a higher level of learning because of your interactions. All right, so let's go to the third one. The search for meaning is in it. So every person, every learner will always have this desire to search for meaning. And humans strive to make sense of what they experience. We want to understand what exactly is this experience, and We try to make sense of this, and we try to figure out what does this mean and how can this actually help us to become better individuals. And humans instinctively want to know what that learning has purpose and value. In part, this is a survival instinct. An understanding of the seasons, for example, of the habits of small edible creatures, can mean the difference between survival and death. For some, this involves a search for meaning in the very nature of creation. For others, at a more immediate level, the need to know why they are asked to complete a particular task in a particular lesson becomes important, and this question should be answered. When teachers share with the class the purpose of what they are doing, the learning objectives, not just what they have to do, then the need for understanding and the meaning can in part be satisfied. So, in it, that means you have in you the desire to learn something. It's not all the time that people have to tell you to study. All right, go learn this. So it's not all the time about it. It's not all the time that people has to force you to learn something. I will teach you one thing. There are some things that we from the inside we wanted to search for meaning of what we are going through or what we are experiencing or what are these things that we are being exposed to. So yeah, as you continue to think about it, you think and search for the meaning, you are actually learning, and this is part of the brain that we have, and that is based on research. This is based on the works of Kane and Kane, right? 12 principles for brain based learning. So there is a need for us to understand how our brain works so that we could connect better and we could respond better to the things around us. Okay. So search for meaning occurs through patterning. When new ideas are encountered, we make great efforts to link them with prior knowledge and experience, which in some way related to them. This complies with a description of human memory put forward by cognitive constructivist psychologists. So this is more on the schema theory, which we have discussed earlier. The schema theory is like first you have this idea, schema theory. There's an idea, one small idea about something. It does not make sense yet, perhaps, but then another idea will come, and then they will connect it. So the more and the less you know, the more likely you just probably conclude immediately. But if you have more ideas about something, and how your schema works is that the more you understand and the more that you know something, the more likely um, you could be able to integrate, right, new information and the pattern as well, and the process of building it, right, the way you put things together becomes more effective in your learning. So it leads to effective learning, right? So that is something that we also have to understand very well, and we could try to incorporate that and integrate that into our learning and in delivering instruction. Okay, the activation of prior knowledge is seen as an essential step preceding the introduction of new material and opening up a sound foundation for new learning. So it says there that the brain seems to have the ability to resist the imposition of meaninglessness. We don't want to do something without meaning, right? We don't want to do something without meaning. We want to look for meanings every time. And it's not our fault because that's how our brain works, right? The search for meaning occurs through patterning, and whether you like it or not, human brain will always function as such. The brain seems to have the ability to resist the imposition of meaninglessness. We don't want something without reason sometimes, right? We try to figure out a way for us to understand what does it mean. They continue by saying that effective education must give learners opportunities to generate their own patterns of understanding. Second one, oh no, no, the second one. I think it's the fourth one. Okay, so the first one, that the brain is a complex and adaptive system. Second one is the brain is a social brain. Third one, we all want meaning in our in our experiences. So the search for meaning is innate in humans, and we have the search for meaning occurs through patterning. So we try to pattern all these things, and sometimes when there are some patterns in our mind, that's how we try to put things together. All right. Emotions are critical to patterning. Emotional intelligence was first described by Mayer and Salovey, further developed by Goldman. Goldman describes emotional intelligence as the capacity for recognizing our own feelings and those of others. Who are you strong with that? You have to be very strong with that, right? Um, yeah, I love the statement. It says, emotional intelligence is the capacity for recognizing our own feelings and those of others, for motivating ourselves, and for managing emotions well in ourselves and in our relationships. Emotional intelligence describes abilities which are distinct from but work alongside what can be called academic intelligence. If an individual is in a state of emotional unrest for whatever reason, it's likely that he will not be able to function effectively as a learner. So if you are disturbed by some things, uh, there could be a possibility that you may have some difficulty in trying to get something, or to learn something academically. Sometimes it can affect you. All right. So it's important to have. I like this idea of relaxed alertness. Relaxed alertness. All right. Obviously, a sensitive teacher will take account of the emotional climate in a classroom. So, emotional climate is very important. But more importantly, a teacher should ensure that the nature of the classroom and the nature of teaching approaches should not lead to emotional unrest in a class or in an individual. We will consider this further when we review the idea of relaxed alertness. Left brain, right brain. Okay, research is only the beginning of understanding the way brain divides learning tasks between verbal and visual, analytical and global, logical and creative. Successful teachers engage learn. Oh, yeah. Um, okay. To make it simple, all right, let's go back. Every brain simultaneously perceives and creates sparks and holes. So, every brain. Okay, continuously, simultaneously, you perceive, you try to figure out, okay, what is this? What is that? All right, what's the impact of this? What's the effect of that? It's very important, right? And it continuously, simultaneously, it perceives and it creates parts and wholes and try to put things together. Successful teachers engage learners in tasks that require both sides of the brain to engage. An example of this might be using art in math lessons or music to help the understanding of a scientific principle. In some classrooms, cross disciplinary approaches are taken, which attempt to embrace the different facets of the brain structure and function. Sometimes, according to the political climate, this notion of an integrated approach to learning is either promoted or discouraged. Among other things, this can be seen as an attempt to recognize and work with the interaction of both left and right hemispheres. Okay, going back to the left and right hemispheres again, left is the academic or logical, and the right hemisphere is the creative side. Okay. Next, learning involves both focused attention and peripheral attention. The brain takes in information directly, but it's also able to give attention to what have been called fringe thoughts. These fringe thoughts, referred to as peripheral signals by Kane and Kane, can be very potent and can even obscure what should be the main focus of the teaching. We are capable of both paying attention to the main point of reference in a teaching situation and at the same time being aware of many of the peripheral or background events which may be present. This has implications for the classroom environment. So, yeah, we need to have focused attention and peripheral attention. So that's why, well, I'm not sure about how others perceive that, but for me, if I'm teaching something in a classroom, I want to make sure that that the ones on the board or whatever I'm presenting will not distract the students. And having a lot of things to see if you're teaching in a classroom, sometimes for children, I mean, the focus might be a challenge, right? So we have to also consider the peripheral attention. So just because they're not looking, it doesn't necessarily mean that they cannot perceive all those things, right? Peripheral signals, okay. uh right. So these signals or fringe thoughts can be very potent and can even obscure what should be the main focus of the teaching. We are capable of both paying attention to the main point of reference in a teaching situation and at the same time being aware of many of the peripheral or background events which may be present. This has implications for the classroom management or classroom environment, since sometimes the peripherals or the peripheral events can can take over from the main event in terms of holding a learner's attention. So sometimes some of the things that we have, or some of the peripherals, or some of the aspects that we could, we could see. I mean, our learners are learning as well with what we thought they cannot see or they don't see, right? So peripheral or background events which may be present. So that includes the way you speak, the way you talk, um, how you are actually like walking around and checking on them. So it has implications. There are some hidden messages transmitted, sometimes inadvertently, and by teachers via medium of body language, the way you talk to them. Does she really like us? Does she really want us to improve, or is she just trying to be strict for the sake of controlling, or does she want to control us? So these are some of the things that your kids will feel. All right, so learning always involves conscious and unconscious processes. So, at a surface level, it's fairly easy to assess what facts may have been learned or what new information has been retained. It's far more difficult to assess the depth of understanding that may have developed during the completion of a learning task. Okay, so learning always involves. I think that's the heart of it. Um, we need to have some time for reflection. We have to understand that learning always involves conscious and unconscious processes. So even those things that they are conscious to say, there are some unconscious things that are happening as things um, take place. We have at least two ways of organizing memory. Yeah, this is another one. All right. We have at least two ways of organizing memory. What's the first one? We have a long term memory, we have a short term memory. This is based on Kane and Kane's work in 1994 and O'Keefe and Nadel's in 1978. In their model, they explain the two types of memory as taxon or local and spatial or autobiographical. So, taxon or local memory is by rewards and punishment, right? Rewards and punishment, that's taxon. Or local memory is motivated by rewards and punishment. So if you are rewarded, yeah, you like to do that. If you are punished, you're afraid to do that. And you have this spatial. All right, spatial or autobiographical memory is more related to the links and associations between events, particularly when personal experience is involved. In this type of learning, recall can be instant and it's more reliant on the logic of links formed at the time of the event in question. So, two types of memory help learners to record their experiences. So now you're recording your experiences, what exactly happened during this time. Um, Right. Teachers can attend to both types of memory by organizing activities into meaningful parts, placing ideas in context, and incorporating a range of learning styles and multiple intelligences into classroom practice. Okay, great. Learning is developmental. Okay, learning is developmental. That means it continues and it helps you develop, right? It is not. It doesn't just You can't just say it's learning and it is not growing. It must expand. Work in the 1980s by Schiebel and Diamond gave insight into the way that the brain is able to grow and produce more physical connections than it had previously been thought possible. It had been a thought that the brain structure was fixed early in the developmental process and that the growth of new physical pathways was not a real possibility. Okay, so it develops. Growing, there should be growth. If you are learning, you are growing. The physical, all right. There's this idea called dendritic fireworks. Hmm. Right? It's like it grows into expansive networks of nervous pathways and connections, dendritic fireworks. This refers to the idea that dendrites, the physical but microscopic branches of the nerves in the brain, which control the movement of electrical nervous impulses, have the ability to grow incredibly rapidly and in many different directions, creating new and complex patterns of neural connections. So, developmental, it it expands, it grows. So this is the beautiful thing about learning, right? Learning is not just in the corner. Learning does not look like the same thing over and over again. It's expansive, right? It grows into expansive networks of nervous pathways and connects you to another thing. That's why if you're learning one thing, you would just notice that, okay, you eventually get yourself connected into something else, and then now you're learning many things. All right. Then we have complex learning is enhanced by challenge and inhibited by threat. So if you have some threats, sometimes you can be affected when you are scared of something. You feel like you're scared of being judged, right? So that could also affect you and your learning, right? For many teachers, the notion of differentiation, that means pitching work at an appropriate level of difficulty for an individual, has become an important element of their work. This has not been done for brain based reasons. We have come to see, based on the work of Piaget or Piaget and Vygotsky, that learning will not proceed if the material ordered is either too complex or too simple. There's a brain based explanation to that. If teaching is pitched too low, the brain based community tells that the learners will be understimulated. If teaching is at precise level of the learner, they work in what has been called a comfort zone. Yeah, okay, yeah, I'm gonna do that. Where little new learning will take place. Teaching at a slightly elevated level, where challenge is provided but the work is not possible impossible, encourages our learners to engage with work. This is a very accurate reflection of the work of Vygotsky and the zone of proximal development. So always remember that complex learning is enhanced by challenge. So if there's no challenge, the learner will likely have this tendency of just relaxing, and they're not taking things too seriously. Sometimes would say, okay, I know what to do. But it's important that learning or complex learning, we can enhance it through giving them challenges, but at the same time, not putting them into threats, right? The more we understand our learners better, the more we can deliver learning. And I think that is really very important. Okay, every brain is uniquely organized. So we have to also know that as educators, it is important that we have to understand every brain is uniquely organized. And what do we mean by that? Okay, we have to understand that there are so many aspects of the brain and the structure and the makeup of an individual's brain that that affects the way the learner actually um, take and process or receives information. In the work of Levine in 2002, I think he came up with this idea, schemas, okay, the myth of laziness, referring to the perception that a teacher or other adult may form of a child based on observed problems with a child's attitude in teaching situations. Okay, he suggests that the attitudinal problems, which can result in a number of unhelpful behavior patterns in the classroom may stem from a variety of unaddressed problems. Some of the problems may be a result of the unique organization of the learner's brain. This can be seen to refer to multiple intelligence theory, and to notions of cognitive and learning preferences. All right, so I think this is all just about understanding the how every brain is uniquely organized and how these things come together. Yep, give the right kind of support. It is important that we have to understand that our learners' brain may not always be the same as what we expect. All right. Okay. Succinctly summarizing the 12 principle. Okay, we're going to look at that. Let's try to look at this of the literary. Yeah. Okay. 12 Principles Above the Literary Organization, an American nonprofit based group aiming to improve American literacy, gives us this short sentence. So, the 12 principles, if you're going to put that into short sentence, the brain based learner closes down under threat, learns via peripheral events, has a unique brain, learns through both conscious and unconscious processes, has various types of memory, and learns best when content is embedded in experience. Wow. It's nice, right? Okay, great. Okay, again. The brain based learner closes down under threat, learns via peripheral events, has a unique brain, learns through both conscious and unconscious processes, has various types of memory, and learns best when content is embedded in experience. That's beautiful. I like that. I really like that. I mean, it speaks to me about learning. The brain based learner closes down under threat, learns via peripheral events, has a unique brain, learns through both conscious and unconscious processes, various types of memory, and learns best when content is embedded in experience. Wow. Wow, that's really nice, right? To actually understand it deeply. That our experiences is also giving us a push into our learning. And when that learning is embedded in experience, that becomes very effective. Right, and we learn best if we are a brain based learner. So we can sometimes be considered, okay, maybe the question that you may have is can a person be a brain based learner? Or yes, we are. We can sometimes be a brain. I think we're all a combination of many things, and we have to understand how our brain works. And I think it's more of this that we have to also take a look at the aspects of our brains and the structure, and you will know that you are somehow getting all those as a learner, brain-based learner. We could be able to grasp the ideas that are presented to us um, differently, and because we have different structures and different types of the elements in our brain, I think it's really important that we could consider all these things. Okay, here's another one from Kane and Kane in 1997. Optimizing the use of the human brain means using the brain's infinite capacity to make connections and understanding what conditions maximize this process. They identify three interactive and mutually supportive elements that should be present in order for complex learning to take place. So, what are these three conditions? Three conditions. Number one, an optical state of mind that we call relaxed alertness. Number two, the orchestrated immersion of the learner in multiple complex authentic experience. The third one is the regular active processing of experience as the basis for making meaning. All right, so we have the relaxed alertness. Let's take a look at that. First, relaxed alertness. What does it mean? Right? 80%. If it's true that 80% of learning difficulties are related to stress, then it should be seen as an absolute priority for teachers to ensure that the learning environment for which they have responsibility is as stress free as possible. It is the state of relaxed alertness that in ideal situations would ensure a stress-free working environment. Then we have, yeah, that's relaxed alertness. Okay, according to Kane, if children are to think critically, they must feel safe to take risks. If children are to think critically, they must feel safe to take risks. That's really nice, right? If children are to take critically, if children are to think critically, they must feel safe to take risks. That's according to Poole in 1997. All right, so it's important. It's important for us as teachers to create a safe learning environment for learning to proceed effectively. All right. Okay, so let's just move on a little bit to orchestrated immersion. Orchestrated immersion refers to a situation in which children can become fully involved in the topic in question. Um, there are various suggestions about how this might be achieved, but in general terms, topics need to be made interesting and accessible. Idea of orchestrated immersion is clearly related to the notions of context and engagement. So don't just tell them, don't just deliver a lecture. They have to be engaged. They have to be a part of it. So, I mean, that's the ideal. In our case, now we were spending a lot more on lectures, but your assignments become your engagement, right? So you have to take part as well if you want to maximize your learning experience. Okay, we also have the active processing. Active processing is an important principle, and again, it's related to ideas discussed earlier, as we can see, right? That you can find here. Right. Some of the detractors of brain based theory comment on the closeness of brain based precepts to elements of what is known and described in other theoretical frameworks. In the case of active processing, the importance of what the constructivists call mental processing and the emphasis laid on engagement and understanding are clearly very close to each other. Active processing includes relating what is new to previous experiences and to real life events. This, too, is related very closely to the constructivist notion of all new learning being built upon a foundation of what has gone before and the importance in practical terms of relating new to old and activating prior knowledge. So, active processing, it has to continue, right? Okay. Orchestrated immersion and active processing should work together to assist learners in seeing a wider perspective. So we want everything to be part of learning. We want experiences. We want authentic situated learning. Importance of experiences are very important. It shows that if you were just focused on just one aspect of learning, which is just language or maybe um, just listening to a teacher, it's not really that effective. I mean, if it's only on that aspect, and you will notice that if you are also having some immersions means you are on the job, you are being placed in that circle of working, right? So that's also very important. All right, great. For the brain to function effectively, there are three important physical prerequisites. All right, so now we're taking a look at what are the things that the brain needs to have in order to function effectively. And there are three important physical prerequisites. The first one, the brain's need for an adequate supply of oxygen, adequate supply of water, and adequate nutrition. So if your brain is not well taken care of as well, I mean health wise, then you will be affected. There will be stress as well. So the brain also has a need for rest. Okay, I like that. So nowadays we just keep on thinking and thinking and thinking, and I think the brain actually has a need for rest. The brain is 75% water, and even moderate dehydration can cause headaches and dizziness. So that's why it's good for us to drink water as well. Right. It's wonderful. It's amazing to actually get in touch with these information And we can actually learn something for ourselves in the way we learn, in the way we get information, how we can actually take care of our brain so that our mind will also be connected to the right things. All right, the brain is 75% water, and even moderate dehydration can cause headaches and dizziness. Okay, great. So water, the importance of water. All right. Oh wow, this is too connected to learning. Water, according to Promise Law in 1998, heightens energy, improves concentration, improves mental and physical coordination, and enhances academic skills. So it's important. So we have to encourage our kids, encourage our students also to drink water. It's very important for them that they have a healthy mind as well, and we need to have enough oxygen. um, if the child has not eaten any breakfast, if the child sits inactive for lengthy periods, allow the heart rate to slow to the point where oxygen is supplied in meager amounts to the brain. And if the child fails to take in adequate amounts of water, we are told that we need to drink between 5 and 8 large glasses of water daily, more on hotter days. The brain performance will drop and the potential for learning will drop commensurately. Wow. We have to really take this seriously. All right. So if we want to give our learners a good experience and we want our learners to continuously maximize their experience and we wanted them to learn at the highest level possible, it's important that we also have to help them understand the importance of taking care of their health. Okay, Tony Buzan, who is known for his enthusiasm for developing new approaches to learning, has undertaken extensive work in many different settings concerning the most effective ways to encourage what he considers to be full use of the brain. Ah, full use. It's good to ask ourselves, are you actually using your brain fully? All right? Okay. He advocates a pictorial. Where is it? Where is it? Wait a minute. He is most well known for his work on the development of mind mapping techniques. You remember the mapping is like schema, right? You get a concept, and you try to write down things that you associate it with, and then you expand. All right, so he is most well known for his work on the development of mind mapping techniques, which he describes as a production of a picture or diagram of one thoughts or conversations. He advocates a pictorial, diagrammatic approach to such activities as note taking and revision. The approach taken in mind mapping, and perhaps to a lesser extent in concept mapping, is to mimic, at a simplified level, the associative nature of the structure of memory patterns in the brain. The brain, Busan tells us, operates on a keyword or concept basis that is extremely helpful in terms of learning to emulate this approach. Accelerated learning is a development in pedagogy which comes in part out of the brain based learning movement. Okay, so accelerated learning, that means it's now moving forward to ideas of research and development in teaching and learning, and it is very much reliant to that, right? It's influenced in particular by such researchers as Buzan in the field of memory, by Gardner's work on multiple intelligences. You remember multiple intelligences, right? That there are some um, ways that a person or a learner could be very good at. Okay, Feuerstein's theory of instrumental enrichment, Jensen and the work of many others in brain based learning, and Sylvester's research on behavior and stress and the effect of stress on learning. Just a minute. Right, okay. So, accelerated learning is a development in pedagogy, and it comes in part of the brain based learning movement. It relies to on ideas of the research again, and it's an umbrella term for a series of practical approaches to learning which are based on research and development aspects of brain function, theories of human attention and motivation. All right, so jumping into the important part of this. Yeah, the notion of accelerated learning has the expectation that the child can reach a level of achievement which may seem to be beyond their capacity. So there's a tendency for us to actually help the child or help them get into a higher level. Um, if you're talking about accelerated learning, you're thinking and you're expecting that the child will definitely perform a little bit higher than what they are expected. And based on the precepts of brain-based learning, which are described above, accelerated learning expects teachers to, number one, create a positive learning environment. Again, it goes back again to the need for positive learning environment. That means there should be some things that are interesting, that includes using of visual, musical, physical factors in the organization for teaching. That also includes the safety, right? We want our kids, we want our learners to actually feel um, safe in their learning. All right, we have the focus feedback on specific improvements in performance which can be understood and acted upon. Focus feedback, that means you can be specific on the areas where you wanted to actually for the learner to improve. Um, it's important as well that we could specify that in a sense that a student or the learner could be able to uh, take action into the feedback that we have given. Third one is giving of an overview of the content, process, and purposes of lessons at the outset. Number four, engage learners by setting problems, using real situations and challenging their thinking. Provide opportunities for learners to work in a variety of groupings and allow for choice in the way that they record and present their work. So you give opportunities for learners, not just just what we want. We don't want our learners to just follow everything that we want to the letter. We want to give our learners a chance to actually have the creative freedom, right? Allowing a choice in the way that they record and present their work. We want to allow time for reflection and discussion. Sometimes we are so eager to just say everything, do everything, tell everything, but sometimes giving them time for reflection, giving them time to discuss is actually and equally very important for their learning, because that's the only way that they can actually get that idea in them. We need to spend time reviewing also what has been learned and how the learning developed, and how what has been learned might be used in the future. So these are the precepts of brain-based learning which are described in the discussion that we had. All right. Smith. Okay, Smith. Smith says no limit. Okay, this is an acronym that he uses to represent seven principles relating to brain-based learning. The first initial comes from the word no. Hmm. The learner and teacher should know how the brain works in learning situation, including the brain as different parts, that the right and left sides of the brain should be active, connected, and working together, that the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic inputs can support the effective working of the brain. I think this is very important. So we have the next one. So we have the no. All right. Okay. We have the no.